Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. A little bit later in the show, I'm going to have an interview with Don Schilling. He had a letter to the editor recently saying that the North Dakota Legislature isn't doing enough to promote workforce development and addressing North Dakota's workforce needs. Now, Don is a chairman of the board of a prominent business in Fargo. He was also a member of North Dakota's Workforce Council, which sent a number of recommendations to the legislature this session. We'll talk about that. Workforce shortages are a chronic problem in North Dakota. I know over the years our politicians have liked to brag about the low unemployment rate, but really in a lot of ways our unemployment rate has been so low it's hard to grow the economy because, you know, any new industry that might want to move here, any new business, well, there's no workers available for them, right? I mean, it's a very small labor pool. In fact, North Dakota typically has at any given moment tens of thousands of job openings that are going unfilled. And, you know, businesses that are filling their jobs, I mean, they're saying it's taking a month, 2 months to find a qualified applicant for a skilled job. It's not a good situation. You don't want to have a high unemployment rate, but you want to have available labor. You want people available to come here and take jobs and grow our economy that way. And, you know, really it's just not been happening. Anyway, you'll hear all that during my interview with Don Schilling. In the here and now, well, I suppose we've got to talk about the Mueller report that came out. Now, I'll leave the parsing of, you know, what the report says and what it doesn't say and which parts of it are going to be released to the public and all the politics around it. I'll leave that to other people. I think one clear conclusion you can take from this, though, is that the press has screwed up colossally on this. Now, we have for years now been hearing a lot of very, very, kind of outrageous claims about, you know, the Trump campaign and the Trump administration's supposed collusion with Russia, and not just from, you know, the usual sort of partisan bomb throwers, but people who are presented to the public by the news media as experts, as reliable sources. I remember at one point, former NSA employee Don Schilling was telling reporters that, you know, Trump was gonna die in jail. The New York Times said that, you know, President Trump's, or I guess then candidate Trump's campaign had, quote, repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. The Wall Street Journal said that spy agencies, remember this, spy agencies were withholding intelligence from the new president out of fear that he was compromised, that he was, you know, in some way, you know, working for the Russians or maybe being blackmailed by the Russians. CNN was telling us that Trump officials had been in constant contact with Russians known to U.S. intelligence. There was a former director of the CIA who helped, basically helped start the investigation that led to Mueller's probe. Said the president was guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, committing acts that were nothing short of treasonous. Hillary Clinton, talking about the way the Russians meddled, saying that they basically weaponized political ads and that they'd been guided by Americans. And then she was asked if by Americans she was talking about Trump, and she said, I quote, "It's pretty hard not to." Former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said he had, quote, "no doubt that President Trump was, quote, in on the deal to help Russians." Now, a lot of those facts are coming from a pretty outstanding article from Matt Taibbi. He's a Rolling Stone reporter. He's got a book coming out called Hate Incorporated. He released a chapter of it in the wake of the Mueller report, I guess being wrapped up, the Mueller investigation being wrapped up. And it's pretty damning. And what's frustrating about it is I can understand that the news media, which I think for the most part leans left. I'm a conservative-minded guy, so from my perspective, it sure looks like most people in the news media lean pretty far to the left. And they've got an axe to grind against President Trump. But what they've been doing, I think, really goes even beyond ideological bias, because you can have an ideological bias and still be fair and still be factual. I have an ideological bias. I like to think that I'm fair. Now, I guess others may disagree, but the problem the news media has overall is they keep making these over-the-top accusations against President Trump. They keep reporting all these things, all these terrible things, and then reality keeps not matching up to it. Now, the Mueller report, I think, is the big kahuna of the last several years. In fact, Taibbi actually compares it to the weapons of mass destruction story under the Bush administration. He's essentially saying this is a new generation's WMD story, and maybe that's true, but certainly it's the biggest story, but there's been a lot of examples of the news media getting, recently, just before this, we had the whole fiasco of their coverage of the Covington kids. Now the reason why this is awful, and it goes beyond merely being unfair to one faction of the country or politically biased or politically slanted. In a lot of ways, this is sort of undermining our very ability to be a republic. I know that sounds like a dire thing, but I really firmly believe that it is true. Let me drill down on that for a moment. We live in a participatory form of government, which is to say that the people have a say in the way we're governed. But what's important for that, what's important for our ability as citizens to make good decisions is to be informed, right? Now, I think we've always had a problem with, a certain portion of the electorate that's tuned out, or they're apathetic, or they're not terribly well informed. And trust me, we've always had problems with the news media, maybe not always doing as good a job as they think they do, or we would want them to do when it comes to informing the public. Sometimes, if it bleeds, it leads, approach to journalism takes over. A lot of times the public's maybe not interested in the things they should be, interested in, right? We're not paying a lot of attention to, the procedural reporting on the local city council or the county commission or what have you. I mean, we're busy people. Some of that stuff's a little dry, and it's hard to keep track of. But, generally we're a participatory democracy, or I guess republic, democratic republic, whatever term you want to use for it. And generally being pretty well informed, I think, is a good thing. And I think if nothing else, if not well informed, at least maybe exposed to a large number of perspectives, right? And so I think what happens is sometimes right now our news media, they're like a herd of elephants just constantly chasing after one story after another. There's often not a lot of pushback. There doesn't seem to be, at least in the News Corps, a lot of difference of opinion. I mean, they've been banging the drum on Trump since the day he was elected. And the problem is I can understand. I mean, believe me, there's plenty that you can report about Donald Trump that's negative. There's plenty of things that he can be held accountable for. But the ability of the press corps to do that stuff, to hold the president accountable on those fronts, is undermined by their tendency to exaggerate things and their tendency to obsess over stories that, well, like the Mueller probe, that just don't turn out to be what they told us it was going to be. And when that happens over and over and over again, I think the American public can start to feel a little bit like they're in a story without reliable narrators. Institutions in our sort of society are important, right? I mean, think about it. When we're having a debate about, I don't know, food stamps, we're going to rely on all sorts of government statistics about, how many people use food stamps and which sort of people use food stamps and why they use food stamps. I mean, we rely on all of that information, and all that information comes from the government. And so if our trust in government is undermined, then our ability to have a debate about food stamps policy, wherever you come down on that debate, is compromised. And the same's true because the news media they're supposed to be our narrators, right? They are an institution unto themselves. They're not the government for a lot of excellent reasons. And it's a competitive enterprise. And some people do good journalism and some people do bad journalism. And there's a spectrum there, and I understand that. But if as an industry they're failing on their jobs, if as an industry we reach a point where we just feel, and I feel like we're there. I mean, you look at the approval ratings for the news media. They're not good, and they haven't been for a while, even before President Trump came into office. If we get to the point where the American public just doesn't feel like they trust what they're reading in the newspaper. They don't trust what they're seeing on television or reading through news reports or what have you. Well, then we're in a lot of trouble. Our ability to debate the important issues of the day to the extent that we even debate them anymore. I mean, anymore it just seems like a constant partisan pie-throwing contest. But regardless, to the extent that we do debate the issues of the day, it's been compromised by a news media that has become obsessed with its own biases. And in fact, has become so unshackled from any feeling of responsibility to try to present a counterpoint, to try to present maybe even a contrarian position, that I just don't think the American public trusts them anymore. That's a dangerous place to be in a society like ours. All right, the interview coming up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Don Schilling joins me now. Now, Don is a member of the North Dakota Workforce Development Council. He's also chairman of the board of General Equipment and Supplies, which is based out of Fargo. Recently, Don had a letter to the editor of the Fargo Forum, headline of which was "Critical Workforce Recommendations Are Being Ignored." I'm going to quote some from his letter. He said, I quote, "With the North Dakota Legislature meeting just every 2 years, there are some initiatives on the table that cannot wait for the 2021 legislation and need to be addressed now. In North Dakota, we saw dramatic changes between 2009 and 2011 with the oil boom, and again between 2015 and 2016 when the oil boom turned down. A lot happens in 2 years, so we must look ahead. Today, we have over 30,000 jobs in North Dakota unfilled. We see 50% of the businesses reporting they cannot grow their businesses without availability of additional skilled workforce. We see 2/3 of the companies in North Dakota reporting that it takes over 3 months to fill a typical skilled position. With 70% of the businesses having 9 employees or less, they do not have the depth or resources to get heavily into the recruiting process on their own. They must manage their day-to-day operations. The North Dakota Workforce Development Council published a report in October 2018 identifying over 36 recommendations which, if followed, could improve our workforce situation. This report was given to the governor and all members of the legislature. In some cases, many times, many items in the governor's proposed budget were a direct result of this report. To date, many of these recommendations have been ignored or brushed over. Now, Don, well, first of all, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you talking to me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
But before we get into some of the specifics of what the legislature has before us, the workforce situation in North Dakota is an interesting one because, as you addressed, during the oil boom, we had a workforce shortage. But I don't think a lot of people realize that even after the oil boom, I mean, even after oil activity went down, we saw a lot of oil workers laid off. You know, our economy took a hit. And by the way, at the same time, you know, the ag sector was taking a hit. They had some commodity price issues as well. Overall, our economy was down there. We had a labor shortage even then. So, I mean, this is a chronic problem our state faces year in, year out, almost irregardless of what the economy is doing.
That's correct. And the reality of it, Rob, is that we've actually had a workforce shortage for well over a decade. So even during the downturn recession that the U.S. was experiencing in 2008 and 9, we had a workforce shortage then. And then with the oil boom that immediately followed that, we continued to have a workforce shortage. And the only reason why it didn't get considerably worse was because we had a lot of transient labor that came in from out of state temporarily to work in the oil patch, etc. And then when some of those jobs went away in the 2014-15 range, a lot of those transient laborers went away. But the reality of it is we've been dealing with of approximately 2.5 to 3% unemployment rate for a long time, and we just are failing to get enough skilled workforce available to the employers in North Dakota to do their work.
So how do we, and again, there are some specific proposals before the legislature, but I always thought that what happened, to me, was very eye-opening, is what happened after the oil boom, because you would think that a lot of those workers, some of whom were quite skilled, could have moved elsewhere in North Dakota's economy and filled some of those unfilled jobs. Instead, they left. I mean, if you look at our unemployment rate during that time, it didn't really change that much. We didn't see a rocket up into the 5, 6, 7% unemployment rate like you might have seen in another state. And the reason for that is a lot of those workers, once their job was over, they left. How do we keep people like that in our state?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, part of the recommendation from the Workforce Development Council's report of October of 2018 kind of addressed the salary issue as well. There's a lot of businesses in North Dakota that need to take a harder look at what they're paying their employees, but that's not the root cause. The root cause, in my opinion, is basically the availability of the skilled worker, which in a lot of cases starts in the high school level, where we don't have enough of our young people engaged in career development through their high school years. They're not experiencing typical career and technical education classes. They may not be seeing any on-the-job participation opportunities. They may not have job shadow opportunities. And for the most part, businesses in North Dakota, a lot of businesses in North Dakota have a hard time even gaining access to those young people to explain to them about what the career opportunities are. So when you look at a high school senior in North Dakota, 7,000 high school seniors annually graduate. Probably 90% of them are zeroing in on, well, I'm going to go to a 4-year college, but I don't really know what I want to do. And that problem is deep-seated in the fact that if they were at their sophomore, junior, and senior levels in high school, if they were exposed to what's out there in skilled labor force, what it paid, and actually there's positions available where tuition's paid if you go to school and gain that skill. If they were exposed to that more, I think we'd see a lot more of that migration of our own youth graduating from high school and moving into a skilled trade.
Now, you are a member of the North Dakota Workforce Development Council. That organization produced some recommendations, some of which were in Governor Burgum's executive budget, and obviously, his budget in the form of legislation before the legislature. You're saying that for the most part, the legislature is not acting on this stuff. You mentioned this stuff in the letter, but tell me, why is the legislature dropping the ball on this, and where are they dropping the ball?
Well, there isn't probably one specific answer, but for example, though, the career academies, there was Governor Burgum put in his budget a one-time $30 million appropriation that he wanted to see go towards the development of career academies in the high school levels in the various cities around North Dakota. Bismarck, for example, has a career academy right now, but several of the other cities need a career academy. It would be beneficial to have one, but they need help. The pump needs to be primed here, and they need a little help getting started with that. And what you'll find is if there was dollars available to some of these cities or school districts to develop a career academy, you'd see a joint donation coming from the private sector to help spawn these and get them up and running. And what a career academy will basically do would be to provide standard high school credits for students taking classes that are non-traditional high school type classes and exposing them to what's potentially might be their future career at the high school level.
I think there's so many. You mentioned kids going to the 4-year, and I think there's been a lot of talk about this nationally. Mike Rowe is a figure that comes to mind. He's done a number of shows like Discovery's Dirty Jobs or whatever. He's become sort of a figure and an advocate, I think, for some of the things that you are promoting, Don, which is this idea that, hey, there's this whole, sort of world, this whole, whole industries of jobs that, everybody has this sort of dream that their kid's going to go to a 4-year college and then they're going to be like a lawyer or a doctor or something like that. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But what he's saying is there are a lot of opportunities to have great careers and to prosper outside of that sort of trajectory. And I think that's something of what you're talking about is let's get out of this rut where everybody just goes immediately from high school into a 4-year college. And let's get more creative with this. Let's point out there's more options, more good options. There's many paths to success and prosperity outside of that one. Is that part of what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. And in particular, I'm not trying to bash a 4-year college, but
sure.
But it also could be a stepping stone. So I could actually see a student going to through some technical training, getting a trade, and learning a trade and getting paid and actually having tuition paid. And if they want to continue their studies after that and move into more of a management positions or whatever in the industry that they have now selected, that opportunity should be available to them. But it was an interesting thing. I went to an human resources conference, and I'm not a human resource person, but I did go to this conference in Bismarck in September. And at one of the presentations, they had some of the current generation students, what they call Generation Z, up on the stage, and we were able to ask them questions. So now you're looking at students that are actually in high school and or haven't graduated from college yet. And I asked the question of them on the stage. I said, how many of you have changed your major in college? And every one of them held up their hand. And in some cases, they've changed it 2 to 3 times. So what does that tell you? That tells me that they're going to college not knowing exactly what they want to do. As they get into college and experience, they start to change their major. But what is that telling me? Telling me that they're wasting tuition dollars on taking classes that end up not being part of the career that they will probably end up in at the end of the day. So we need to do better up front in helping these students with their parents select the right career choice that they think that they want. And obviously, once they get into college, or into school, trade school, whatever, they could decide to change again. But the reality of it, let's give them the toolbox of tools that they can go through it and they can make a better decision. And then from that decision, then they know what college is going to cost them, or trade school, and where they're going to be at the end of the day.
Don, a lot of what you're talking about, it makes sense, and I support you. But a lot of what you're talking about is dealing on the kids that are already here, right? Our high school graduates in North Dakota, and that's great. I think we want them. We all love North Dakota. We'd all like those kids to be able to find good opportunities here in our state to get educated and to have good careers and good lives right here at home in North Dakota. Nothing wrong with going elsewhere in the world to seek your fortune, but there's nothing wrong too with having good options here in North Dakota too. But I think the other part of the equation is how do we get people from other parts of the country to move here? Because we graduate, like you said, about roughly 7,000 high school seniors a year. Even if every single one of them took a job in North Dakota, it would take 4 years to reach those 30,000 unfilled jobs that you mentioned in your letter to the editor. So I don't think that's the only solution. How do we make North Dakota more attractive to have skilled workers come here, and then if their job here ends, stay here and look for another job? How do we solve that problem?
Well, I think that also is addressed in the workforce development report in 2 different areas, and so I'll mention 2 different areas. The first area is we talked about is opportunities for employment in areas where there are barriers. So, for example, reservations would be one, and also people that are exiting prison incarceration would be another. And we've thrown up a lot of hurdles for a lot of these people to have to go over in order to get into a program that fits what they could possibly be doing or wanting to do. For example, a prisoner leaving the state penitentiary in Bismarck could have been taking online classes at UND. And what happens now is that once he's pardoned, he cannot go to UND and be accepted there until the end of his pardon, or the end of his whatever
parole or whatever
parole period. Correct. So they throw up this barrier. Now they're working at removing some of that, but these are over the years are some of the things that have accumulated that have stopped people from being able to pursue a career that they could possibly do very well at, and kind of get their life straight. The other thing that we addressed also was trying to reach out, what we call in-migration, reach out to the people that have lived here and moved away to try to get them to come back. The people that are more likely to come back to North Dakota, in my opinion, are going to be people that probably grew up here and didn't feel that they had the potential to do something here, and they moved to Minneapolis, Chicago, whatever. And what we want to do is attract those to come back. So we'd actually requested and in dollars in one of the legislative appropriations for a statewide campaign for to try to attract in-migration, returning potential employees back to North Dakota. $0 committed by the legislature for that. Yeah. I mean, and I'm not a big proponent of advertising campaigns, et cetera, but where do you start? I think you have to start with things like that. Create lists, find out people, send out mailers, find out if they're interested, and then they can come back and see how things have changed. If they've left here in 1990, this state has changed a lot.
Yeah.
In 20 years. They need to see that.
And I think it's not. I don't think it's enough to just have headlines saying. I mean, because those headlines are pretty typical. You know, North Dakota has a lot of unfilled jobs. It's news on a regular basis. I mean, that makes headlines all the time. But I think if we really want to solve this, I think we got to start getting really personal. I think we almost got to drill down to the job by job level. And really work on a very personal level of, like you said, making connections with some of these people who have left the state, saying, hey, there's opportunities back here at home. Not only can you move back home, you can be back where your roots are, maybe back near some friends and family, but hey, there are great opportunities for you to come back and take advantage of. Don, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you.
That's it for today's show. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday. You can subscribe on, the podcasting platform of your choice. We're on Stitcher these days. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the various Google podcasting platforms. If you're having trouble on any given podcasting platform, send me an email. A, because I could probably help you with it, and B, because I'd like to know if you're having problems, there may be other people having problems. And hey, I don't want anybody to have any problems accessing this podcast. Also, if you have any questions or feedback or anything, email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. That includes questions for our weekly guests, Senator Kevin Cramer and Congressman Kelly Armstrong. You can also follow both me and Say Anything Blog on the various social media platforms. Well, two of them, Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Rob Port. Just search for Say Anything Blog on those platforms. You'll find them. We're not yet on Pinterest. I'll admit I don't really know that much what Pinterest does. And, we're definitely not there, so don't look for us there. Anyway, if you do add me on a social media platform, be sure to say hi, because I like it when people say hi. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.